Blake Thompson thought he was throwing out a poor woman who didn't belong in his luxury showroom. Less than 24 hours later, he would be standing in the same spot wishing he could take back every word he said. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe people deserve respect no matter how they look, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that dignity matters. Now, back to Naomi Carter. The morning sun poured through the towering glass walls of Prestige Motors, one of the most exclusive luxury car dealerships in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina. Rows of polished vehicles gleamed beneath crystal lighting, each one worth more than many families earned in a year. Sales associates in tailored suits moved confidently across the marble floors, greeting clients whose designer watches and expensive clothing signaled purchasing power before they ever spoke a word. It was a place built on appearances, and on that particular Tuesday morning, appearances were about to fool everyone. Naomi Carter pushed open the dealership's glass entrance and stepped inside. At 36 years old, she carried herself with quiet confidence, though nothing about her appearance suggested wealth. She wore simple jeans, clean white sneakers, and a light brown sweater. Her natural curls rested neatly on her shoulders, and she carried a small leather purse that had clearly been used for years. To most people, she looked like an ordinary woman running errands on her day off. Several salespeople glanced at her before quickly looking away. One returned to checking his phone. Another turned his attention toward a couple examining a six-figure SUV. Naomi noticed the reactions, but said nothing. She was used to being overlooked. Across the showroom, Blake Thompson adjusted his navy tie while reviewing sales reports on a tablet. As sales manager, Blake prided himself on reading customers within seconds. In his mind, success depended on identifying serious buyers and avoiding what he called time wasters. The moment his eyes landed on Naomi, he made his judgment. He saw the sweater, the sneakers, the absence of designer labels, and he immediately decided she wasn't worth his attention. What Blake didn't know was that the woman he had just dismissed would soon become the center of the most humiliating day of his career. Naomi walked slowly through the showroom, admiring the vehicles. Her gaze paused on a stunning midnight blue coupe displayed on a raised platform beneath spotlights. A small smile appeared on her face. She stood quietly, studying the elegant curves of the car and imagining someone she loved behind the wheel. For a moment, she seemed completely unaware of the eyes watching her from across the room. Blake noticed her lingering near the dealership's most expensive model and began walking in her direction. His polished dress shoes echoed across the marble floor. Several employees glanced up, sensing that something was about to happen. Naomi turned as the sales manager approached. Blake forced a professional smile that never reached his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. The question sounded polite. The tone behind it did not. And in that instant, neither of them realized that this ordinary conversation was about to change everything. Naomi returned Blake's gaze with a polite smile. "Yes," she said calmly. "I would like to learn more about the coupe." Her voice was warm and confident, carrying none of the uncertainty Blake expected. He glanced toward the midnight blue vehicle and then back at her, already preparing the response he had used countless times before. "That particular model is one of our premium vehicles," he said. "It starts at $285,000. He emphasized the number carefully, waiting for surprise to appear on her face. It never did. Naomi simply nodded and looked back at the car. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Can you tell me about the interior options?" For a brief moment, Blake seemed disappointed. Most people backed away once they heard the price. Instead, she asked practical questions. Before he could answer, Naomi stepped closer to the vehicle and admired the craftsmanship. The deep blue paint reflected the showroom lights like polished glass. Every detail reminded her why she had come. Her younger sister, Vanessa, had always loved cars. Growing up, Vanessa kept photographs of luxury vehicles taped to her bedroom wall. She would point to them and joke that one day she would own something beautiful enough to make traffic stop. Life, however, had not been easy for either of them. Their family had faced struggles that taught them the value of every dollar earned. Years later, when Vanessa fought through one of the most difficult chapters of her life and emerged stronger than anyone expected, Naomi promised herself she would celebrate that victory in a meaningful way. The coupe sitting before her was more than a car. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and a future Vanessa once feared she might never have. Naomi smiled at the thought. Blake mistook that smile for something else entirely. In his mind, she was daydreaming. Another visitor pretending to imagine ownership. "Would you like a brochure?" he asked. His tone suggested it was the most she could realistically afford. Naomi looked back at him. "Actually, I would like to sit inside if possible." The request seemed reasonable. Yet Blake hesitated. Around them, several sales associates had begun paying attention. One young employee named Daniel watched from a nearby desk, sensing the growing tension. Blake folded his arms. These vehicles are usually shown during scheduled appointments. Naomi glanced toward another customer sitting comfortably inside a luxury SUV less than 30 feet away. "I see," she replied. "I was not aware appointments were required." Daniel frowned. He knew appointments were encouraged, but rarely mandatory, especially for serious buyers. Blake shifted his weight and forced another smile. "For certain clients, we make exceptions." Naomi understood exactly what he meant. The words were polite. The message was not. Still, she remained composed. Years of working with community leaders, donors, and families from every walk of life had taught her something important. Character revealed itself fastest when people believed you had nothing to offer them. The showroom suddenly felt quieter. Several customers were now openly watching. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Blake appeared increasingly confident. He believed he controlled the situation. What he did not realize was that every assumption he was making was pulling him closer to a mistake he would never forget. Blake gave a small shrug as though the discussion had already reached its natural conclusion. "These vehicles are purchased by clients who generally schedule consultations in advance," he said. "It helps us ensure their time is respected." Naomi recognized the implication immediately. He was no longer talking about appointments. He was talking about status. "I understand," she replied calmly. "But I am here now, and I would still appreciate learning more about the vehicle." Her composure only seemed to irritate him. Blake had expected embarrassment. Instead, he found himself facing someone who refused to react the way he wanted. Across the showroom, two sales associates exchanged amused looks. One whispered something to the other, and both glanced toward Naomi before quickly looking away. The atmosphere was changing. What had begun as simple dismissal was becoming a performance. Blake could feel an audience forming, and he enjoyed being the one in control. "Perhaps," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "you would be more comfortable looking at some of our certified pre-owned inventory." Naomi followed his gesture toward a separate section of the dealership. The suggestion was delivered with practiced politeness, but its meaning was unmistakable. Daniel shifted uneasily at his desk. Even a few customers appeared uncomfortable. Naomi remained steady. "Actually," she said, "I came specifically for this model." Blake smiled thinly. "It is a very exclusive vehicle. That is why I am interested in it." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched across the polished showroom floor. Blake studied her face, searching for hesitation. He found none. Naomi simply stood there with quiet dignity, focused on the car rather than the people around her. That confidence only reinforced Blake's assumptions. In his experience, people who dressed simply and spoke calmly were either extremely wealthy or completely unaware of reality. He had already decided which category Naomi belonged to. "May I ask," he said, "whether you have researched the purchase requirements?" Naomi looked at him. "I have researched the vehicle." Blake chuckled softly. One of the nearby associates laughed with him. The financial commitment can surprise people. Daniel lowered his eyes. The room suddenly felt smaller. Naomi could sense dozens of invisible judgments being made around her. Yet she had spent years helping students whose potential was overlooked because of where they came from. She had sat with families who were dismissed before they ever had a chance to speak. She knew exactly how assumptions worked. That knowledge gave her patience. "I appreciate your concern," she said, "but I am prepared to discuss the vehicle seriously." Blake's expression hardened. The conversation was not ending the way he wanted. A wealthy couple entered the showroom at that moment. Immediately, Blake's face transformed. His smile became warmer. His posture straightened. He glanced toward them and then back at Naomi. The contrast was impossible to miss. "Excuse me," he said. "Some clients have appointments." The couple had not even reached the reception desk yet. Naomi watched as Blake started to walk away. Then she asked a simple question. "If I wanted to purchase the coupe today, would that be possible?" Blake stopped. Several heads turned. The question hung in the air. He slowly looked back over his shoulder. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Not enough to appear openly rude. Just enough for everyone nearby to hear. And just enough to make it clear exactly what he thought of her request. Around the showroom, a few smiles appeared. Others looked down awkwardly. Naomi felt the sting of humiliation beginning to settle over the room. And Blake, convinced he had already figured her out, was only getting started. The laughter lingered in the air for only a second, but to Naomi it felt much longer. Not because it wounded her pride, but because it revealed something deeper about the people around her. Blake slowly turned back toward her, clearly encouraged by the reaction he had received from several employees. The attention of the showroom was now focused entirely on them. The polished luxury vehicles, the soft music, even the conversations between customers seemed to fade into the background. "You are serious?" Blake asked. "You want to purchase the coupe today?" Naomi nodded. "Yes." Blake smiled again, but there was no warmth behind it. "Then perhaps we should discuss financing." "I do not need financing," Naomi replied. "I would prefer to pay in full." The room seemed to pause. Daniel looked up immediately. One of the sales associates stopped typing. Even a customer standing near the coffee station glanced over. Blake stared at her for a moment before shaking his head, as if he had just heard something ridiculous. "Pay in full," he repeated. "For a vehicle that costs nearly $300,000. Naomi maintained eye contact. "That is correct." Blake folded his arms. "Well, that would certainly require verification." Naomi reached into her purse and calmly removed a business card. "That should not be a problem." Blake barely looked at it. Instead, he placed the card on a nearby desk without reading the information printed on it. "You understand," he said loudly enough for others to hear, "that we cannot simply hand over luxury vehicles because someone walks in and claims they can afford one." A few uncomfortable glances spread through the showroom. Daniel could feel the situation slipping into dangerous territory. This was no longer professional caution. It was public humiliation disguised as policy. Naomi looked at the card sitting untouched on the desk. "You have not even looked at it." Blake shrugged. "I do not need to." The words hung heavily in the air. A hush settled over the showroom. Naomi felt dozens of eyes on her. Some sympathetic, some curious, some silently agreeing with Blake. For the first time that morning, disappointment appeared in her expression. Not anger, not embarrassment. Disappointment. She had spent years believing that people could be better than their assumptions. Yet here she was, watching someone decide her worth before learning a single thing about her. Blake noticed the change and mistook it for surrender. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Listen, ma'am. I think it would save everyone time if we were realistic." Naomi remained silent. "These cars are designed for a very specific market." He gestured toward the showroom. "People generally come prepared before making purchases of this size." Naomi glanced around the room. The silence had become almost uncomfortable. Then she spoke quietly. "What exactly is it that makes you think I am unprepared?" Blake froze for half a second. The question was simple, direct, impossible to answer honestly without exposing what everyone already suspected. The room grew even quieter. Daniel looked down at the floor. A customer near the reception desk slowly folded his arms. Blake felt dozens of eyes waiting for his response. Instead of answering, he took the path of arrogance. "I think it would be best if you left," he said, "before this becomes even more awkward." A collective silence swept across the showroom. And in that moment, every person watching understood exactly what was happening. For several seconds, nobody moved. The polished showroom that had felt so alive only moments earlier seemed frozen in place. Naomi looked at Blake, then at the business card he had never bothered to read. She could have argued. She could have demanded to speak with the owner. She could have listed her accomplishments, her professional connections, and every reason she deserved to be treated differently. Instead, she did none of those things. Because the painful truth was that respect offered only after credentials are revealed is not respect at all. Naomi slowly picked up her card and placed it back into her purse. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly. The dignity in her voice only made the moment more uncomfortable. Blake nodded as though he had won some kind of contest. "Good luck," he replied. The words sounded less like a farewell and more like a dismissal. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. Customers watched her leave. Some looked away when their eyes met hers. Others seemed embarrassed by what they had witnessed. Daniel stood near his desk, wanting to say something, but uncertainty held him back. The glass doors opened. Sunlight poured inside. Then Naomi stepped outside and disappeared into the afternoon. The moment the doors closed, conversations slowly resumed. Blake returned to the wealthy couple he had been eager to impress. Within minutes, he was laughing and discussing luxury upgrades as though nothing unusual had happened. But not everyone forgot. Daniel glanced through the showroom window and saw Naomi sitting quietly inside her modest SUV. She remained there for nearly a minute before starting the engine. Something about her expression stayed with him. She did not look angry. She looked disappointed, as if she had hoped for better from people. Across town, Naomi drove through familiar streets lined with oak trees and brick storefronts. The city moved around her in its usual rhythm, but her thoughts remained inside the dealership. Not because she cared about the car. Not because she cared about Blake. What troubled her was how quickly strangers had decided who she was. She thought about Vanessa. She thought about the excitement on her sister's face when she had first imagined the gift. Gradually, a small smile returned. The gift still mattered. One unpleasant encounter would not change that. By the time Naomi arrived home, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across her neighborhood. Her house was beautiful but modest, tucked behind mature trees and surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. Most people passing by would never guess how much influence and success existed behind its front door. That was exactly how Naomi preferred it. She carried her purse inside and set it on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet. A framed photograph near the window caught her attention. It showed her and Michael smiling during a charity event several years earlier. Michael Carter, her husband, her partner, the man who had spent decades building one of the most successful investment firms in the country, while somehow remaining grounded enough to value kindness over status. Naomi stared at the photograph for a moment before looking away. She had not planned to tell him about the dealership. There was no reason to create conflict over one arrogant salesman. Some people simply revealed who they were. Yet upstairs, resting on a table in the hallway, her purse remained slightly open. And inside it, the business card Blake had refused to read waited silently. By the end of the evening, that forgotten card would set events in motion that nobody at Prestige Motors could possibly imagine. That evening, golden light filtered through the windows of the Carter home as Naomi prepared dinner in the quiet kitchen. The events at the dealership had faded from the surface of her thoughts, but not completely from her heart. She moved through familiar routines, chopping vegetables, answering a few messages from colleagues at her foundation, and reviewing plans for an upcoming scholarship program. On the surface, everything seemed normal, yet every now and then, Blake's words returned to her. Not because they had hurt her pride, but because they reminded her how easily people judged one another. Around 7 o'clock, the front door opened. Michael Carter stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. At 44, he had spent years navigating boardrooms, investment negotiations, and billion-dollar decisions. But the moment he entered his home, those concerns seemed to disappear. He smiled when he saw Naomi. "Long day?" he asked. "Productive day," Naomi replied. Michael kissed her forehead and placed his briefcase near the entryway. They sat together for dinner, discussing ordinary things. Community projects, family updates, Vanessa's upcoming birthday. For a while, the conversation remained light. Then Michael noticed something unusual. Naomi was smiling, but not quite as much as she normally did. After years of marriage, he recognized the difference immediately. "Something happened today," he said gently. Naomi looked up from her plate. "Nothing important." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You know I can tell when you say that." A small laugh escaped her. For a moment, she considered changing the subject. Then she quietly told him about the dealership. She described the coupe, the questions she had asked, the assumptions Blake had made, the card he refused to read, the request that she leave. She recounted everything calmly, never exaggerating, never speaking with bitterness. Michael listened without interrupting. As the story continued, his expression remained composed. He did not become angry. He did not raise his voice. In fact, he became even quieter. And that was when people who knew Michael best understood he was thinking very carefully. When Naomi finished, silence settled between them. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly. Outside, crickets sang in the warm Carolina evening. Finally, Michael leaned back in his chair. "Did you tell them who you were?" he asked. Naomi shook her head. "No." "Did you tell them about the foundation?" No. Did you tell them anything that would have changed their behavior? Naomi smiled sadly. That was the problem. I should not have needed to. Michael nodded slowly. The answer seemed to confirm something he already suspected. Respect that depends on status is not respect at all. For several moments he stared through the kitchen window into the darkening yard. Then he looked back at Naomi. Which dealership was it? The question sounded simple. Naomi gave him the name. Michael nodded once. Nothing more. No speech. No promise. No dramatic declaration. He simply memorized the answer. Later that night, after Naomi had gone upstairs, Michael remained in his home office reviewing documents. A photograph of Naomi and Vanessa sat beside his computer monitor. His eyes drifted toward it. Then he opened a contact list on his phone and made a brief call. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Few words were exchanged. When the call ended, Michael set the phone down and glanced at his watch. Somewhere across town, the employees at Prestige Motors were locking their doors and heading home, completely unaware that by this time tomorrow, their entire understanding of the previous day's events would be turned upside down. The next morning arrived bright and clear over Charlotte. At Prestige Motors, business began as usual. Sales associates straightened displays, polished already spotless vehicles, and prepared for another day of serving wealthy clients. Blake Thompson walked across the showroom floor with the confidence of a man who believed yesterday had proven his instincts correct. The memory of Naomi Carter had already been dismissed from his mind. As far as he was concerned, she had been nothing more than another person pretending to shop for a car she could never afford. Around 10 o'clock, a low murmur began near the front windows. One employee paused while arranging brochures. Another stopped in the middle of a conversation. Outside, something unusual was approaching. The first thing people noticed was the shine. Then came the unmistakable silhouette. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided toward the dealership entrance with effortless elegance. Its polished exterior reflected the morning sunlight like liquid glass. The vehicle moved slowly, deliberately, drawing attention from everyone who saw it. Conversation stopped. Customers drifted toward the windows. Even Blake looked up from his tablet. Luxury vehicles arrived at Prestige Motors every day, but this was different. There was a quiet authority about the Phantom that commanded attention without demanding it. The car rolled to a smooth stop directly in front of the main entrance. For a moment, nobody moved. Employees exchanged curious glances. Several customers stepped closer to the glass. One associate whispered, "Who is that?" Another simply shook his head. Nobody knew. The tinted rear windows concealed the passengers inside. The anticipation grew. Blake adjusted his tie and immediately switched into his most professional mode. Whoever had arrived was clearly important. He could feel opportunity approaching. The showroom doors opened automatically as several employees hurried toward the entrance. Outside, the driver stepped out first. Dressed in a tailored black suit, he moved with calm efficiency before opening the rear passenger door. The entire showroom seemed to hold its breath. But instead of immediately revealing the passenger, the driver stepped aside. Seconds passed, long enough for curiosity to become suspense, long enough for every eye in the building to focus on a single point. Blake found himself walking closer. Customers gathered nearby. Daniel watched from behind his desk, sensing something unusual unfolding. Then a polished black shoe appeared beneath the door. A tall figure emerged from the Rolls-Royce. The man stood confidently beside the vehicle, adjusting the cuff of his navy suit. His presence was unmistakable. Several customers recognized him instantly. One gasped softly. Another stared in disbelief. Blake's confident expression began to fade. He knew that face. Nearly everyone in Charlotte knew that face. Michael Carter, founder of Carter Holdings, investor, philanthropist, one of the most influential businessmen in the region. The realization swept through the showroom like an electric current. Employees straightened immediately. Managers rushed forward. Customers whispered among themselves. Blake felt excitement replacing confusion. If Michael Carter had arrived, this could be the most important sales opportunity the dealership had seen all year. But Michael was not looking at the vehicles. He was not studying inventory. He was not admiring the showroom. Instead, his eyes moved calmly across the room as though searching for someone. Then he spoke 4 simple words that would change everything. "I would like to speak with Blake Thompson." The room went silent. The silence that followed Michael Carter's request seemed to stretch across the entire showroom. Blake felt every eye turn toward him. A moment earlier, he had been imagining a major sale. Now he found himself walking forward under a level of attention he had never experienced before. "Mr. Carter," he said with a practiced smile. "It is an honor to meet you. I am Blake Thompson." Michael shook his hand briefly. His expression remained polite but unreadable. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me." Blake relaxed slightly. Whatever concern he had felt began to fade. Perhaps this was simply a business opportunity after all. The dealership owner, Richard Lawson, hurried across the showroom floor with a broad smile. "Mr. Carter, welcome to Prestige Motors. Had we known you were visiting, we would have prepared a private consultation." Michael nodded courteously. "That will not be necessary." The owner laughed nervously. "Of course, we would be delighted to help you find anything you need." Michael glanced around the showroom before looking directly at Blake. "Actually, I am here because of a customer who visited yesterday." The smile on Blake's face froze. Around them, employees exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel immediately felt his stomach tighten. He already knew where this conversation was heading. Michael continued. "A woman came here interested in purchasing a coupe." Blake swallowed. "We see many customers." Michael nodded. "I am sure you do." Then he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card. The same card Naomi had offered the day before. The same card Blake had refused to read. Michael held it between two fingers. "Does this look familiar?" Blake stared at it. His face slowly lost color. The room grew quiet again. Richard Lawson leaned forward to read the name printed on the card. His eyes widened instantly. "Naomi Carter, Executive Director, Carter Educational Foundation." The owner's expression changed immediately. He knew the organization. Everyone in Charlotte knew the organization. It funded scholarships, educational programs, and community initiatives across the state. Suddenly, the card carried a weight that Blake had never bothered to discover. "Mr. Carter," Richard began cautiously, "there may have been a misunderstanding." Michael looked at him calmly. "Was there?" No one answered. The silence became painful. Then the automatic showroom doors opened once again. Every head turned. Naomi stepped inside. She wore the same simple style she always preferred. No designer labels. No dramatic entrance. No display of wealth. Yet the moment Blake saw her, realization crashed over him. The woman he had dismissed. The woman he had asked to leave. The woman whose card he had ignored. She walked directly toward Michael. He smiled warmly as she approached. Then, in front of everyone watching, he gently took her hand. A collective hush swept through the showroom. Several employees stared in disbelief. One customer actually gasped. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, already knowing exactly what Blake was thinking. Blake stood frozen. His mind replayed every word he had said, every assumption he had made, every opportunity he had ignored. Naomi looked at him quietly. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction, no desire to embarrass him. Somehow that made the moment even harder to endure. Michael glanced toward Blake and then back to Naomi. "Is this the gentleman you told me about?" Naomi nodded once. The room went completely silent. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Blake stood motionless as the weight of the situation settled over him. The confidence that had carried him through the previous day was gone. In its place stood a man confronting the consequences of his own assumptions. Richard Lawson cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, I would like to personally apologize for your experience." His voice was sincere, but it came too late. Naomi looked at him calmly. "I appreciate that." Richard glanced toward Blake. "This does not reflect the standards we strive to uphold." Yet even as he said the words, everyone in the room understood a difficult truth. Standards are not revealed when serving powerful people. They are revealed when serving those who appear to have no power at all. Blake lowered his eyes. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Naomi listened without interrupting. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I made assumptions I should never have made. I was wrong." The showroom remained silent. No one rushed to defend him. No one offered excuses. The facts spoke for themselves. Michael stood beside Naomi without saying a word. He did not need to. His presence alone had already exposed everything that mattered. Naomi studied Blake for a moment. Then she surprised everyone. "Yesterday was not the worst part," she said gently. Blake looked up. "It was not." Naomi shook her head. "Being denied service was not what bothered me. Being underestimated was not what bothered me." The room listened carefully. What bothered me was realizing how many people might be treated the same way simply because they do not look wealthy enough, important enough, or successful enough. A hush fell over the showroom. Several employees lowered their eyes. Daniel felt those words more deeply than anyone, because he had witnessed every moment. Naomi continued, "You thought I deserved less respect because of what you saw on the surface. The truth is that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect before you know anything about them." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Blake's face reflected genuine regret. For the first time, he seemed to understand the lesson. Richard Lawson immediately offered to arrange a private purchase, discounts, special services, and anything else the dealership could provide. But Naomi simply smiled. "Thank you, but that is not necessary." The answer surprised everyone. Michael glanced at her with quiet admiration. She had never been interested in proving her status. That was never the point. Naomi turned toward the exit. Before leaving, she looked back one final time. "People show you who they are when they think you have nothing to offer them," she said softly. "The challenge is deciding who you want to be in those moments." Then she and Michael walked toward the doors. The showroom remained silent as they left together. Outside, sunlight reflected across the polished black Rolls-Royce waiting at the curb. Employees watched through the glass as the couple departed. Nobody rushed after them. Nobody attempted another sales pitch. Some lessons could not be repaired with discounts or apologies. Weeks later, people at Prestige Motors still talked about that day. Not because a billionaire had visited. Not because a luxury car had been purchased. They remembered it because a quiet woman had walked into their showroom and revealed something far more valuable than wealth. She revealed character. And on that day, everyone learned that dignity costs nothing to give, yet losing it can cost far more than any price written on a showroom window.